Here at today's management committee meeting. Our first item of business is to approve the agenda. Are there any amendments to the agenda from for today? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda passes. Next is the approval of the November 13th management committee minutes. Are there any changes to the minutes? Can I get a motion to approve the minutes from November 13th?
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Our first non-consent business item is 2024-333, 2025 non-represented plan changes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the council. My name is Cassandra Tabor. I'm the Chief Human Resources Officer. Before you today is the 2025 non-represented plan, which covers approximately 400 of our employees who are not covered by provisions of a collective bargaining agreement. The non-represented plan is reviewed on an annual basis and reflects any necessary changes and also updated compensation. So two key revisions for 2025 include Section 10 salary administration. This indicates a 5.5 general increase for non-represented employees and either a step movement or performance-based increases depending on where the employee sits on the grid. And also Section 10 salary administration indicates a 2.5% performance increase, if achieving a rating of meets expectations or better on the year's prior performance evaluation. And this is in alignment with our recently settled collective bargaining agreements. This increase and the change is within the 2025 adopted operating budget and is consistent with the bargaining parameters established by the management committee for represented bargaining units as well. All additional changes are reflective of housekeeping to add clarity to our definitions, application of the non-represented plan, and align with any statutory changes. An additional note, the regional administrator and general counsel compensation, those are addressed separately, and you'll see those coming to the management committee at a future date. And I will stand for any questions.
Any questions, comments for Cassandra Tabor? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
In a second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Cassandra.
Thank you.
Next, we have 2024-335JT, same week, Metro Beeline, Resolution 2024-26.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. My name is Katie Roth. I'm Director Arterial BRT at Metro Transit. I have a brief presentation today that frames business item 2024-335. It also provides background on items in the fourth quarter budget amendment, which Stuart will present, business item 2024-332. With thanks to Councilmember Barber and Councilmember Pacheco for the repeat of this presentation that was also provided to Transportation Committee on Monday night. I will provide background on the issue at hand, which is that we are moving some state bond funding around between multiple arterial BRT projects in the fourth quarter budget amendment. I'll speak to how all those pieces fit together and then also frame up item 2024-335, which deals with contingency on the Metro Beeline project after we make these bond changes through the fourth quarter budget amendment. So back in 2020, we were fortunate that the legislature included $55 million for arterial BRT in its bonding bill, which was passed in October of that year and signed into law. The law stipulates that the funding be used for the B line, the D line, and to the extent funding remained, to the E line for design and engineering. And as with other bonds, we understood that at the time that those bonds must be encumbered by the end of this year, 4 years after the date of issuance, to avoid becoming subject to cancellation. At the time, we didn't have final budgets for these projects. We hadn't yet opened bids on the D line, and we were very early in the B line process. So we allocated the funding as is shown in this first line, initial setup 2020 November. After we were able to establish that this funding would not be needed for either the D line or B line, the funding that was placed into the placeholder line, we were able to move that into the E line project in the first quarter of 2021. Subsequently, we opened the D line project on time and under budget in December of 2022. And so across 2023, in budget amendments in that year, we moved unspent contingency from the D line project into both the B line and the E line. So the bottom line of this chart here today shows where the authorization stands prior to the fourth quarter budget amendment, with $6.2 million in the D line, $38.3 million in the B line, and importantly for the subsequent items I'll go through, $10.5 million in the E line project. So at issue is that in August of this year, Minnesota Management and Budget, or MMB, informed the council that based on their bond council's interpretation of the law, none of these state bonds can be expended on the E line project while we're still continuing to make draws on the B line and the D line. Our interpretation and the intent of the negotiation in 2020 was based on completing the project budgets, while MMB has read the statute to mean completing the projects in full. So because we continue to make progress on both the D line and the B line and continue to make draws there, that means that the $10.5 million of funds in the E line project are essentially restricted through that cancellation deadline of December 31st of this year. Therefore, we need to use that $10.5 million on either the B line or the D line project and then find other sources to make that E line project whole, or we lose the ability to access that funding. So over the past 3 months, we've worked with a lot of folks across the council to come up with the plan I'll walk you through, which shows up in the fourth quarter budget amendment to solve for this problem. I'll note that in working with Ned Smith and others, we presented this approach to MMB staff late last month, and we received their affirmative head nod that this approach would be satisfactory for them. So what this table shows is that the fourth quarter budget amendment fully removes that $10.5 million of state bonds in the E line column. And I'll summarize the 3 rows, the 3 actions that we are taking on the next slide, and I'll come back to this slide at the end of that. So the first and largest place where we're shifting funds around is to match federal grants on the D line and the B line projects. We're moving state bonds into those federal grants as match, and then moving out RTC, MVEST, and state appropriation dollars into the E line project. So the graphic you see here on this screen shows the starting point of the $10.5 million in state bonds needing to be reallocated on the left side, traces through the various shifts that make up that reallocation, and then shows the endpoint where we're going to land after the fourth quarter budget amendment on the right. With these shifts, there's no change in the total authorization amount in the projects, just in the source of funding. And as noted, this is included in the fourth quarter budget amendment. The second bucket deals with the fiber optic network that's needed to provide connectivity between B-line stations and our network hub at the Haywood campus. So we identified roughly $900,000 of B-line bond eligible costs needed for that B-line connectivity that were accounted for in other projects. So in the case of Minneapolis, downtown fiber, shown in the middle of this graphic here, we moved bonds into that project and shifted out an equal amount of RTC into the E-line. And then in the case of some work on the E-line itself, highlighted in the lower right corner, we actually decreased the E-line budget by about $500,000 and will be increasing the B-line budget in order to spend those bonds through that project on those expenses with that shift. The third piece deals with our local work agreements with our county partners. This was a business item that Transportation Committee acted on Monday night that will go to council this week. And again, this is reflected in the fourth quarter budget amendment. So I'll deal with Hennepin County first. Working with the county, we identified approximately $1.7 million of work that they had funded alongside the B-line project. It could be an eligible use of these bonds. It would also be eligible under the B-line environmental document. We're in the process of executing an amendment to our Beeline agreement with the county that reduces their participation by approximately that $1.7 million. With Beeline bonds being used for that work, the county will instead fund an additional $1.7 million of improvements on the E-line project. The funding will be recognized in the fourth quarter budget amendment, contingent on Hennepin County's December 12th board action and the council's action later today on our agreement. Next, we have a very similar approach with Ramsey County. We are reducing the county's participation in our Beeline agreement by approximately $1.1 million and funding that instead with state bonds shifted from the E-line to the Beeline project. But because we don't have an agreement with Ramsey County on the E-line project, owing to its location not being in Ramsey County, there's another step involved. So we shift $1.1 million in 2023 state bonds from the G-line to the E-line project, and then the county's former Beeline funding is used to fund the G-line instead. A new funding agreement is being established for this purpose, but the G-line funding will not be recognized in the capital budget until January, after Ramsey County's board takes action on this piece of our shifts. So bringing this all back together, you can see in that E-line column how these three sources add up to the $10.5 million mark and allow for us to use those state bonds on the D-line and the B-line project and find other sources for the E-line. So that all factors into the fourth quarter budget amendment and what you'll see for the various arterial BRT projects in that business item. Next, there is one more step remaining to ensure that the full $55 million in 2020 state bonds is secured prior to that December 31st cancellation deadline. And that deals with encumbrance, or demonstrating that the funding is committed in contracts or otherwise obligated to delivering the projects for which it was appropriated. So the top line of this table shows the amount of bonds in each project budget following the fourth quarter budget amendment. Of that amount, on the second line, the full amount of the D-line funding has been expended or encumbered or will be by the end of 2024. However, on the B line, you see that just over $4 million is not expended or encumbered. However, that funding is very much needed in the project budget for contingency. Now, typically, we don't take any formal action through council to establish project contingency on a project such as this. It's included in the project budgets and is there as needed throughout the project. But in this case, we do need to take action to formally demonstrate that this funding is needed in the project and should not be subject to cancellation per the process spelled out in state statute. So bringing us to business item 2024-335. Working with MMB, we identified that we could establish that this unencumbered funding is otherwise obligated by bringing forward a resolution to the council. So Resolution 2024-26 resolves that the remaining unencumbered bonds in the B-line project are otherwise obligated for potential changes through the construction final completion date of December 31st of 2025. So while the B-line is scheduled to open for revenue service in June of next year, our construction contract dates are established as December 31st for that final completion through which we'll continue to make draws against the project. Council action on this resolution allows for the unencumbered funds to avoid being subject to cancellation and allows for us to continue to have those funds available through the duration of B-line construction, which is in keeping with industry best practice and with council procedure. So, Mr. Chair, the proposed action 2024-335 is that the Metropolitan Council pass resolution 2024-26 establishing obligation for the Metro B-line project contingency through December 31st of 2025.
All right, thank you. Do we have any questions? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a comment. Our staff learned about this in August, and to be able to do all of this and get all the partners on board and do all the work, this combination between the ABR team and our finance staff, really, I mean, it's just amazing. Otherwise, we would have lost 10 and a half. And $10.5 million out of these projects, which as we know is very critical. So really just on my hands, you staff. This is just amazing what you guys have done. Thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right. Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
And a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes. Thank you. Next, we have the 2024-332 JT same week fourth quarter budget amendment.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm Stuart McMullen, Budget Director here at the Council. And as Katie said, the 2024 fourth quarter budget amendment makes changes to the capital budget in Metro Transit. The proposed amendment was reviewed and approved by the Transportation Committee on December 9th and the Management Committee here today on the 11th. With me and able to answer any questions are Katie and Ed Petrie, the Finance Director at Metro Transit. In the Metro Transit capital budget, the amendment adds or changes the amount for 6 projects in Metro Transit's ACP. The amendment adds $166.5 million in Hennepin County funds and $41.6 million in Hennepin County Regional Railroad Authority funds to the Blue Line Extension Project. The business item in the Transportation Committee contained a discrepancy in the narrative around the dates of approval for the council, or by the council for project 61403, noting that the council would take action on November 13th, when they will in fact take action today, December 11th. Hennepin County will take action on their part of this project tomorrow, December 12th. The motion and tables approved by the Transportation Committee were correct. This amendment also adds the use of state bond, amends the use of state bond funds and local funds in the B line, D line, and E line projects according to the provisions of the 2020 legislative bonding appropriation, as Katie has just discussed. The individual projects and their changes are outlined in Table 9. If this amendment is approved by this committee and at the council tonight, it will not be reflected in the council budget that the council is also considering tonight. If both are approved, the amendment will be reflected in the capital budget in the first amendment in 2025. So therefore, Mr. Chair, the motion is that the Metropolitan Council authorizes the 2024 unified budget as amended and in accordance with the attached table. So with that, Katie and I and Ed could answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments for the team? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Next up, we have 2024-340 JT same week, transit funding allocation policy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, council members. My name is Charles Carlson. I serve as Executive Director for MTS. Business item 2024-340 JT is the transit funding allocation policy. This proposed policy builds on the existing state transit funding allocation policy. There are a few changes that we're incorporating through this revision. I'll remind you that this was the focus of the November 20th Committee of the Whole meeting. So a few weeks later, we're back with the item itself, having gone to Transportation Committee on November 25th, and now to Management Committee tonight. So changes in this policy include, we set principles and the region's approach to develop transit budget forecasts and allocations. We establish an interim allocation of sales tax funds to suburban transit providers for calendar year 2025, which would be based on a proportionate share of ridership and would be dispersed upon receipt of funds by the council. This policy expands our current policy direction to include federal formula funding and adds regional transportation sales and use tax funds within the policy. It does not allow use of federal formula funds on the initial capital build-out of transit guideway projects, except when the council is initiating the project. And then finally, it incorporates policy direction to sequester special transportation service funds or metro mobility funds to that program itself. So funds received for that program can't be used for other purposes, which is part of the transition of the program to a state forecast basis in fiscal year 2026. So we, through this policy, we have additional clarity around current funding practices. We set up an allocation for suburban providers for 2025, and then really we'll begin the work of a longer term allocation and other potential changes for how we manage funds in the region that we would then incorporate in a 2025 revision to be effective for 2026 and beyond. So really this is setting the foundation from which we'll be embarking on a number of different collaboration steps and activities with transit providers in the region, and plan to come back before you in the third quarter of next year to adopt a further revision to this policy. With that, Mr. Chair, the proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council adopt attached FM 12-3 transit funding allocation policy and direct staff to develop procedures to implement this policy. With that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Any questions or comments for Charles? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I find it amazing that we're at this point. I'm very excited for this to come up tonight at council as well. And that the action is only 2 lines and the policy is 5 pages doesn't reflect that it's been well over a year of work and a whole ton of time meeting and mountains of spreadsheets and data and things to get this boiled down to something. But it really does provide us some good direction going forward, and really kind of provides the framework as we now have our sales tax in, we've got all these other things, and now there's a good roadmap for us to apply it. So I really want to thank Charles and Leslie and all of my finance staff again, lots of time working on it, so well done.
Any other questions? All right, can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, that passes.
Except
We need to wait for
Yeah, we need.
Councilmember.
Oh,
Councilmember Chair.
We just need you to vote.
I was working on my computer. Councilmember Pacheco, so the motion was moved and seconded, and so we're now doing the voice vote. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion passed. Thank you, Charles. Next we have 2024-344, same week, annual sole source hardware software maintenance services.
I hope they got your technology problem solved.
I don't know, when they hand this back, but they still give you a sticky note, you kind of, I don't know if this is
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. I'm Gretchen White and I'm the CIO, and I'm here with Joey Jacoby to speak to the 2024-344, which is our annual sole source hardware and software maintenance agreements. Typically, Information Services brings forward a sole source request each year, and primarily as an efficiency piece, but I'm gonna let Jody give you some background on the sole source process and how we come to this business side.
Thanks, Gretchen, Chair and committee members. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the background for this list. What is our typical process for reviewing each and every sole source? And then a little bit of the detail on this. So for about the last 15 years or so, IS has been bringing forth a cumulative sole source list. And it's really out of efficiency. As you will note in your business item, there's 39 different vendors with products on this list representing what the business item is. And each of these individually don't require a value per signature authority to bring forward to the management committee. But cumulatively, the value is within your signature authority. So this truly is just for efficiency and also for transparency. The standard process for a sole source, and this also happened with the IS request, is each of the projects are individually reviewed. In procurement, we have a sole source review team that looks at the products, shops the market and determines if there are any other vendors available who can perform the work. As you'll see, many of the services and products on this list are software and licenses, and as such, we need to get it from a single provider. And so that's the standard process, and with this, we did, in looking at the list, we did have a conversation with IS, and 7 vendors were removed because we were able to find multiple different resellers or service providers that could fulfill the service. A sole source, as you are likely aware, is an exemption, and they need to be justified individually. So each of these have been reviewed. None of these individually need your signature authority approval, but because of efficiency and from an administrative perspective, they were packaged together and the cumulative value is within your signature authority. So that's a little bit of history, why this is being brought forward with IS for administration, efficiency and transparency, and then on a sole source, each of the individual requests are taken out separately, reviewed, and then determined if it is truly a sole source.
Do we have any questions before I move on?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How many of these are MCUB vendors? What percent of the 3.3 million, 3.5 million is MCUB? And was that taken into consideration?
Madam Chair, Council Member, I'm not sure if any of these are MCUBs. That's certainly a component, but when it is a sole source, there's only one vendor that can perform the work. So there aren't specific goals set on it. It's really based on the unique services, and many of these on this list are software and they are licenses. So we're very restricted on who we can get it from.
So maybe that would be a good way to maybe put more information into the table, you know, software license, so that question doesn't come up on the, going forward.
Are there any other questions? I have a question. When we remove vendors, what are the criteria for removing vendors?
So we have over the past few years, we worked to not only reduce the number of vendors on the list, but also the dollar amount. And we do that through partnership with procurement, that where we do look to review if there are multiple sources that we can actually procure the item.
Any other questions? All right, can I get a motion to approve?
Oh, I think I need to do my part.
sorry.
So, Mr. Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to execute sole source purchase orders for ongoing maintenance, hosted services, and support services in an amount not to exceed $3,450,000. This includes software and hardware referenced on the attached 2025 Information Services Sole Source Vendor List.
Thank you, Coach. Can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Our last non-consent business item is 2024-345 St. Week, Microsoft Enterprise Agreement Amendment 2, Contract 2818057.
Thank you. So I'm here to speak about the Microsoft Agreement Amendment 2, 2024-345, Contract 21P057. We have a large Microsoft footprint here at the Metropolitan Council, and with that comes a large multi-year contract encompassing many technologies. The technologies can be end-user based, like your Office 365, so your email, Word, and Excel, things like Teams and SharePoint. And it also includes a large amount of cloud services, which is your operating systems, databases, automation tools, logging that takes place to support our underlying environment. Because this suite of products has different licensing models, and it makes it our most complex agreement that we deal with in information services. In 2021, we began our journey to migrating to Azure Cloud. Since then, we've increased our consumption of cloud services, And also, we've increased the quantity of end user licenses that we need here at the council. Because of this, we're requesting an increase in the contract value of $3.3 million through April 2025. So with that, Mr. Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute an amendment to contract 21P057 with Insight Public Sector Incorporated to add $3.3 million for the Microsoft licenses and support of Windows, Office 365, SharePoint, and Azure Cloud Services for a total contract not to exceed the amount of $18,150,000.
Are there any questions or comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand how the software licenses work and stuff, but it seems like in a lot of endpoint users, but we had an amendment already, we're getting another amendment. So are we getting ahead of this to project going forward in our budget that we're not gonna come up with $3 million amendments when needed? We kinda got you once you got the systems, and so I know, this is how it works personally, this is how it works with software in general, so I'm just hoping that, the IS can negotiate this and you can help negotiate this so we're not seeing these consistent escalations.
So I would like to speak to that, and yes, as you mature your cloud journey, cost becomes a big part of that, and understanding what increases the cost and making good decisions with that. So along with procurement, we have a team working, and we brought in an outside Microsoft licensing and cost expert to assist us not only with the negotiations, but with recommendations for us to control those costs and estimate those costs going forward. Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, can I get a motion to move? And a second.
Second.
All right, all those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Thank you. All right, we now get to the fun part of the agenda information. The first one being Invest and Economic Forecast Update.
Good afternoon again, Mr. Chair. Again, I'm Stuart McMullen. I'm the Budget Director here at the Council. I'm going to speak quickly to the economic forecast and then its financial impacts to the Council's budget that was released here by the Minnesota Management and Budget Office on December 4th. The first slide here describes the changes in this forecast to the motor vehicle sales tax, the amount of money that would come into the Council. Generally, this was good news for the Council. It's an increase of 0.3% in state fiscal year 25, 3.9% in state fiscal year 26, and 3.4% in state fiscal year 27 from the most recent February forecast. After the suburban transit providers would have received their share of the MVEST funds, this would provide an additional $27 million to the Council's transportation programs over the next 3 years. The forecast this time last year had been pretty bleak for MVEST, so this forecast is an increase of 5.7% over state fiscal year 25, 9.7% in state fiscal year 26, and 9.5% in state fiscal year 27 compared to where we were one year ago today, November 2023. This is also the first time the state is forecasting the state fiscal year 28 and 29 biennium, and they're projecting pretty strong growth rates, 4.2% and 4.8% growth year over year over the course of those 2 years. Main things we're going to be watching on this are the changes in interest rates on the purchases of new cars and used cars, and the decisions consumers are making as to whether to buy or lease cars kind of in that economic environment. So move to this regional transportation and sales tax forecast that was released. The Department of Revenue spent a few extra days on this one because we've had a number of conversations with them about the reasons that the forecast and the actual results had been different as substantially as they've been since the inception of the forecast. The receipts in the last few months for sales tax have been extremely encouraging to us. This forecast, however, reflects a reduction of 7.2% in state fiscal year 2025, 7.2% again in state fiscal year 26, and 7.7% in state fiscal year 27 from the most recent 2024 forecast. After distributing 5% of those funds for active transportation grants, this would include a reduction of $95 million to the council's transportation programs over the next 3 years. Again, this is the first time now they're forecasting state fiscal years 28 and 29, and it's a growth rate of 3.6% and 3.6% again, year over year growth. So I'll stop right there and ask if there's any questions you have on either one, the forecast, MVEST, or the regional transit sales tax, sales and use tax.
Any questions for Stuart?
No.
Thank you, Stuart.
The last, we'll talk about then the changes to the proposed final budget that the council will be considering tonight from the public comment budget that was passed in October, and there aren't any changes included in this budget this year. The capital amendment that the council will take up will not be included in the unified budget. So if again the amendment is approved tonight and the budget is approved, that capital amendment will be reflected subsequently in the budget when it's amended in 2025. At that time, we'll also include the updated MVEST forecast and sales tax forecast into the unified budget. This year, we didn't receive the information in time, kind of partially due to the Department of Revenue taking a couple extra days to prepare it, and then the quirks of the calendar and when the council meetings came about. So in the past, we would have had the MVEST forecast into the budget you're adopting. This time we'll amend it into the budget in January of 2025. All the council members will have received all of the public comment that we received during the public comment. You should have received an email yesterday from Michelle with the comments to date. So again, I'll stop there and answer any questions the committee might have.
Any questions for Stuart? All right. Seeing none, thank you, Stuart. Our next information item is the quarterly financial report. Ned Smith.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Ned Smith. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the Metropolitan Council. As is our tradition, we're here today to talk through the third quarter financial report, which is basically our forecast for where we're going to end for 2024. I'm also joined by Matt Selmeyer from Environmental Services, Ed Petrie from Metro Transit, and Heather Giesel from MTS. So I'll start at a high, whoops, not that fast. I'll start at a high level, looking at our operating reserves. The key headline here is that all divisions are performing better than budget, so our reserves continue to be above target. So we keep reserves to make sure that we can operate through rough times, and those are set by council policies. And you can see where those are, and you can see that all of our reserves are well above, across the divisions and for the general fund across the council. So we are in good shape from a reserve perspective. And in terms of better than budget, each of my colleagues will explain how they are for each one of those divisions. For general fund itself, we get two sources of revenues, or two sources of sources. One is the revenues, which is from our property tax. Those are collected in July and in December, and we are on track there to be at or a little bit above budget. And then we also are funded by our transfers from the divisions for the support that regional administration provides to them. In terms of expenses, we are just a little bit better than budget. And that is kind of driven by two key factors. One is HR is going to be under budget as we continue to fill out our staffing. And that is masking that our IS is over budget. And that's mostly driven by the growth that we're seeing in IS this year, particularly in response to cybersecurity and other enhanced services. That's something we're going to keep a close eye on in 2025 because we anticipate that HR will be fully staffed. So we will need to watch IS closely to make sure that both of those do come in on budget. But all of that still puts us in a good state for our beginning balance, for our reserve at 35 million. Those assigned or committed. Just a reminder for what those are. 2.5 is for our self-insurance. 4.7 million is for our compensated absences, so that's where we do accruals for vacations. And then regional water supply is money we've set aside to help with the regional water supply plan, particularly around the regional planning that we do for the region. That's a redundant, but anyway. And with that, I will turn it over to Matt for environmental services. If there are no questions about general fund. Very good, thank you.
Thanks, Ned. My name is Matt Sahlmeyer. I'm the finance manager in environmental services, and I'm here today to talk to you about how we're projecting to end the year on revenues, expenses, and transfers. And on the revenue side, we're projecting to end the year $3.5 million over our budget. The biggest driver there, around $2.7 million, is for investment earnings. So when we set our budget about 18 to 24 months ago, we had been looking at lower interest rates and we weren't planning to make as much money on those cash balances that we have on our reserves. And so the interest rates have gone up. So we're going to be getting more than we had initially planned for, which is a good thing because we'll take that money and that's very helpful to us. We're also going to be about $750,000 over in state appropriations revenue, and that's a pass-through grant for water efficiency, and it's really just a timing factor of when we set those budgets. We don't always know all of the appropriations that we're going to get from the state for the year. As that information comes in, sometimes it can be a variance to our budget. So again, that's $3.5 million over on the revenue side. On the expense side, we plan to end the year $1.4 million under budget. There's really a lot of offsetting pieces. That 1.4 million puts us within 1% of our expense budget, so very close. So where we're going to be underrunning, we're going to be underrunning on the utility side. We're going to see we see natural gas prices drop from where they were a couple of years ago. And then on the electric side, we've done some capital projects that have helped with our aeration efficiency at the Metro plant. And then also on the chemical side, we're really very efficient. We've been very efficient this year with our mixing of our polymers, and so we haven't had to use quite as much of that chemical. So that saves us some money there as well. Again, so the chemicals and utilities are savings around 4.6 million. We're seeing some offset. The biggest piece is probably in our material costs for inflation from what we budgeted. So again, when we set that budget a year and a half, 2 years ago, the prices that we were paying, they've gone up a bit for inflation, and so we're seeing some offset there. On the transfer side, we plan to be $100,000 over budget. That's pretty small. It's really just due to the timing of our equity painters that we have. So that is money that is funded from RA, from the levy fund. We plan for those painters to be working in 2021 and 2022, or 22 and 23, but there's some timing delays with getting those positions filled, and because of that, there's just a little bit of a delay, and that's going to cause the $100,000 over budget in our transfers. Moving down to SAC, so SAC is sewer availability charge. We plan to come in at 16,500 units. When we plan for the number of SAC units, we typically plan around 19,000 units. That's a 20-year average. We're coming in a little bit under this year. It's primarily in apartments. As you'll see on the next slide here, we're still going to be at a very healthy reserve balance. So we're planning to go down around 15 million in our SAC reserve from 129.7 million to 114.7. Around 8.5 million of that is planned, so we use some of that SAC reserve to help fund PAYGO. That helps with rate mitigation. So 8.5 million of that $15 million drop has been planned. The other 6.5 million is really an impact of lesser apartment growth in the region. So we're still going to be quite healthy at the end of the year at 114.7. We keep a long history on this chart, as you can see, because during the last recession, that reserve came down quite a bit. it's at a healthy amount right now, but if another recession were to occur, we'd be in a good place with a healthy reserve that could go to a lower point. And I think that's my last chart. With that, I will turn it over to Ed.
Turn it over to Heather.
To Heather. Sorry.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, committee members. I'm Heather Giesel, Director of Finance and Administration for Community Development and Metropolitan Transportation Services. So starting with HRA revenues are projected to be $800,000 favorable to budget. This is driven primarily by higher interest earnings than anticipated. We do not budget for investment earnings, so any of those that are received are above and beyond what we've budgeted. Federal pass-through revenue is currently lower than budgeted year to date, but is forecasted to end the year close to budget. This is just a function of when we receive the money from HUD. Expenses are projected to end the year favorable to budget by $700,000, primarily a result of lower general administrative expenses. These are things like we're seeing less travel and professional development in HRA, lower general operating expenses, and lower salaries due to a few vacancies throughout the year. Housing choice voucher subsidy payments are also projected to end the year close to budget. Last year we saw these housing choice vouchers above our budget, so we made some adjustments for 2024 to more closely align with where those were trending. Year-end reserve balance is 17.1, which is well above the target balance of $9 million. Stand for any questions, or I'll move on. I think Metro Mobility is next.
Go ahead.
Okay. So moving on to Metro Mobility, revenue is projected to be unfavorable to budget by $900,000. This is a result of lower passenger fare revenues than budgeted. Ridership continues to be at about 85%. I think we only saw about 1% growth between 2023 final numbers and 2024 year to date. So we have adjusted our ridership for 2025 downward to 95% of pre-COVID levels, trying to get more in line with what those actuals are. But right now we're seeing lower ridership than budgeted. This lower ridership is being offset by higher investment earnings due to higher cash balances on hand. So we had about $1.8 million in investment earnings, and we had not budgeted for any of it. Total expenses are coming in favorable to budget by $2.8 million. Higher general operating expenses and fuel costs are being offset by lower salary costs and contracted services expenses. So within that, we're seeing higher Metro Mobility costs, but those are being offset by lower than anticipated activity in the Metro Move program. And then salary savings are being driven by a few vacancies again that we have throughout the year. Also seeing lower travel and telephone expenses contributing to those lower expenses. Year-end reserve balance is $12 million, which is above the council's 5% reserve target balance of $6 million. And I'd be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Questions for Heather?
Pass it to Ed.
Great. Committee members, Ed Petrie, Metro Transit Finance. I will start the next slide, I believe. So some motor vehicle sales tax. We have a couple slides here, motor vehicle sales tax and also on the regional sales tax. Stuart's already talked about those, but overall motor vehicle sales taxes are coming in pretty close to target where we wanted to see them in state fiscal years 25 and forecasted to slightly increase in 26, so that is all good news. What that means for us then is reserve balances. Right now we have, as of the end of September, about a $36 million reserve balance. If you recall with motor vehicle sales tax, we went on motor vehicle sales tax back in 2008. The council made the decision to budget 95% of the forecast. Anything collected in addition, up and above that 95% goes into reserves to be available for future years' operations. So we are collecting basically at the 100% level right now. At 5% now will go into reserves to be used in 2025. Our regional sales tax, as Stuart mentioned, that's our new sales tax that started October 1, 2023. It is slightly running under the November forecast of between 7 to 8%. Forecasted to continue that trend about 7% down in the next couple state fiscal years. It'll be about $90 to $95 million reduction if it continues at those levels. that is one of the taxes that we're watching very close every single month. And just really looking at it, really working with the state to really look at the receipts that we're collecting to make sure it's on. But right now with the motor vehicle sales tax, that gives us, we have right now, we have a balance of about $180 million in the reserve. As you recall, that's one of the reserves that we had previously talked to the council about. Is the fact is that we're not going to use as much of it in the earlier years, but then as we get a few years down the road, as capital maintenance and those types of items really kick in, we'll be using that reserve balance down. So this is all according to plan. We're basically right on plan right now with our reserves. With that, Chair Committee members, I will move on to Metro Transit bus operations, light rail operations, and commuter rail. Overall Metro Transit bus operations, we had a planned reserves of about $101 million. We're going to use reserves of about $19 million. We have a positive variance of about $82 million this year. Most of that is on the expense side. One of the things I will just say is that this is not ongoing savings. This is one time, because if you recall, during 2024, we started the year at a much lower service level than what we had originally planned on because of not having operators available. We've had very, very successful hiring in 2024, and right now at the end of 2024, our operator levels are basically right now at our service levels. So we had the early savings during the year, but now we've reached the service levels we need, and now moving into the 2025 budget, we're basically at the operators levels that we need for the 2025 service. As a result of having less operators during the year, we also then had savings in fuel, parts, and supplies. We've also had savings in mechanics because we're under mechanics. We're trying to hire mechanics right now. And then I know we've been done presentations on the police. We're currently running, we have a full-time police force of 171. We're currently running around between 108 to 110. So that has been the consistent pattern throughout the year. So that's another area that we're continuing to try to hire. But overall with the rest of the items on Metro Transit bus operations, on the revenue side, about $1.9 million positive for the year. It's made up of three big things. First of all, it's, investment earnings are favorable, about $14 million. One of the big things with it, if you'll notice, our fund balance right now is beginning fund balance was $261 million. One of the reasons for that significant fund balance was in calendar year 2023, we were hearing at the federal level and from APTA that they were recommending that all transit agencies, if you had available expenses, to pull in your federal funds, your federal relief funds. We pulled in over an additional $100 million of federal relief funds in calendar 23 to save the money in case of a federal clawback. We're planning now to use those monies in calendar year now 25, where we originally were. So when we adopt the budget this evening, you'll notice that there's over $100 million use of reserves on bus operations in 2025. It's these federal funds that we pulled in 23. We're now going to use them in 25. Well, the good thing was we pulled the money in, put it into the savings account. As a result, we earned over $14 million in interest income this year. So it's kind of the gift that's giving for us this year. On the passenger side, our revenues are down about $7 million. That's due to lower than budgeted ridership, but also our average fare per passenger. And we're also watching that throughout the year. The other item that was an adjustment was federal revenues. We actually drew in on bus operations, our federal relief funds. If you recall, the council originally received $725 million of federal relief funds, of which 687 stayed with the council. Of that, we were going to draw, basically all the modes have drawn all their portion in 2024, except for Metro Mobility. Metro Mobility will draw, I believe it's $22.5 million in the first 6 months of 2025. If you recall, starting July 1st, it becomes a state forecaster program. So we were working with Heather and with Stuart, and we needed a little more federal funds to get Metro Mobility through June 30th of 2025 before they become a state forecaster program. So we underdrew the bus operations federal dollars, put it into Metro Mobility so we can pull it in the first 6 months to cover Metro Mobility in 2025. Overall, with all that being said, we had a positive variance once again of $82 million. We're going to end reserve balances about $242 versus our target balance of just over $39 million. As I said, though, we're planning to use just over $100 million in 25, so we will start to chew this down basically. Metro Transit light rail operations. We had a planned use of reserves of about $11.9 million. We'll end the year using $2.7 million. We had beginning reserves of 22, gives us ending reserve balance of just over $19.5 million versus our target of $9.5 million. Just like with bus operations, the additional reserves now will get used in calendar year 2025. Some of the savings that we saw on light rail operations is, first of all, revenues were overall about $1 million from budget. We had $1.7 million under budget on passenger fares, but over $600,000 of this was offset by additional investment earnings because of pulling additional federal funds in fiscal year 23, putting into reserves and calculating and earning interest earnings on that. On the expense side, expenses are under budget about $9.2 million. Savings, again, just like on the bus side, savings that's about $7.7 million in salaries and benefits. If you recall, we had originally budgeted 10-minute frequency for the light rail system in 2024. We were running 15-minute frequency until October of 2024. August of 2024, I'm looking at Brian Funk. August of 2024, we changed to 12-minute frequency. So now we're running a 12-minute frequency, budgeting though in 2025 to return to 10-minute frequency. If we can hire enough operators, that is the plan. We also then had savings in materials and supplies and utilities also. Commuter rail operations. We had planned use reserves of $3.1 million. We're gonna have a surplus of just over $800,000. That would give us ending reserves of just over $11.9 million versus our target of $1.5 million. Over on revenues, we're positive about $300,000, positive $100,000 on passenger fares, and also then positive on interest earnings due to the fund balance. On the expense side, we have savings of about $2.2 million. That's mainly due to salaries and benefits being under budget and fuel. One of the other items I just quickly wanted to talk about was ridership. Right now, where we're running compared to 2019 levels, this is as of September, the end of September, bus ridership, we're at about 62% of 2019 levels. Once again, we watch those trends very closely every month. Light rail ridership is at about 60% of 2019 levels, and North Star is at 16% of 2019 levels. With that, Chair, committee members, we would stand for any questions.
Any questions? Yeah, go on.
So just a quick comment. Thank you, and it's always nice to hear this, that we are on pretty good, stable financial footing. And I think as we're headed into what I expect to be quite a period of uncertainty, it's very nice actually to see some of these reserves and to know that we do have that there, because I think there's some unknowns coming up over the next couple of years.
My question is, natural gas being down, is that a seasonal thing or do we expect that to continue to next year?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, that is, it's not necessarily, it can be a seasonal thing, but in this case, what's happened is that the natural gas prices actually doubled shortly after the pandemic. And so in 22 or so, when we were making our 24 budget, we were conservatively estimating that those natural gas prices were gonna stay really high. Now, so we went from spending about $1.5 million a year on natural gas up to spending about $3 million, and now we're back to spending about $1.5 million, and that's really just from, and that's on an annual basis, and that's really just from like the price of natural gas and where that's set at for about everybody in the country.
Any other questions? All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next item is Federal Transit Administration Semi-Annual Disadvantage for Business Enterprise Report.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Council and committee members. Ashanti Payne, Assistant Director, Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity. And I am here to present on the results from our administration of the DBE program, which we submit those reports on a semi-annual basis to USDOT. And that is done first in June for the first half of the federal fiscal year, and then due December 1st for the second half of the federal fiscal year and federal fiscal year end. And I'm pleased to report that we submitted our report on time. And we did achieve our goal. Normally, I am joined by Trina Bolton, who is the team lead within the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity on our small business programs. She is the one that puts together this report. Her and her team work hard to coordinate with various business offices in Metro Transit, as well as external partners. As of this report is majority manually put together, and her team does an excellent job of presenting this report year after year. As also we know that this report is one of the requirements that we have to fulfill to ensure continued federal funds through USDOT via the Federal Transit Administration. It includes outcomes relative to projects of construction, architectural and engineering, professional technical contracts. Our goal is set every 3 years. We most recently did it last fall. We contracted with the University of Minnesota to perform that for us. From that methodology and analysis, we knew that it would be a challenge for us to meet the goal, just based on the projected projects over these 3 years and the availability or lack of availability in some of those projected scopes. And this report is based on achievement against annual and awarded contracts during the reported period. As I mentioned, this is just compares our first half. If you remember when we presented, we were under the goal. So it was, again, we were at 9.6%. So we had to do some hustling and really hard work, both within Metro Transit, OEEO, in order to come out and reach that 13.4% goal. And we ended up at 13.5% for the year end, a total of 17.42% in the second half of the federal fiscal year, with 23.22% being in our subcontracting achievements. This next slide on page 3 shows the breakdown between gender and ethnicity. Again, one of the things that I will say is over the years that the equitable distribution of dollars within gender and ethnicity has improved, and where previous years it would have been in the 80% range for Caucasian women, and is more balanced and more distributed. Not to say that we don't have areas where we can improve, but definitely both in terms of dollars and number of contracts, we are making strides in that area. This next slide really just shows kind of a breakdown of the DBE directory, both by gender and ethnicity and location within the state, and also those DBEs that are located and certified with us outside of the state of Minnesota. Just gives an idea of where those firms, how they split up, and how they are disaggregated within our directory, and what we have to choose from, as well as the prime bidders and proposers that are striving to meet goals that are established on our projects. Some of the major contracts that were awarded, the E-Line, major construction, Haywood Office Systems upgrade, Hopkins Rail support facility. We usually have high participation from DBEs on large capital projects. Where we did have some challenges is the fare collection equipment and fast fare fare box upgrade. Those were both sole source. So no DB goals were established and they were high dollar values, which accounted for, us barely just meeting the goal. If you don't factor in those projects, we'd have probably been around where we've been historically. One of the things we did mention and talk about is if there is opportunity to utilize our local funds on projects like that those are considerations that we should talk about and discuss in the future. Also, one of our key indicators that we look at is how many prime or direct awards to DBEs were made during the reporting period. And we had 7 different DBEs that were awarded prime contracts. The other thing, there was a higher spend to minority male firms than female firms. This is the first time that I've been doing this work where that's ever happened. I mentioned that a little bit of the more equitable distribution that we had. So that was an outcome. Again, that's the first time that I've ever seen it happen. We have 5 contracts that are awarded to Native American firms, 17 to Black American firms, and 30 to Hispanic American firms. This shows our participation. Again, last year we had our highest in our history, which was 20.8. And since 2020, we have been on the rise. And again, this year, though we met and achieved our goal, we dropped down to 13.5%. Again, this kind of demonstrates a little bit what I was talking about. If you look at 2021 as compared to the subsequent years in 2024, where we had no participation from Black American women, Hispanic women, Native American women, across the board. You see in the later years, you see those columns are filled with dollars and a more equitable distribution compared to when 2021. And that's a continuation of that distribution among gender and ethnicity. So our path to continued success through partnership and inclusion. Our Mentor Protege program is one of those programs that has yielded success. That's where we partner certified small businesses with larger, longer established businesses to work on specific aspects of their business. And currently, we have 3 DBEs. The Metropolitan Council has 3 DBEs that we certified that are in Mentor Protege agreements. We were out on the Green Line Extension project a few months ago, taking pictures with PWS and London Construction, and working on an article just to highlight some of the successes through that relationship that have yielded and been a benefit to the program. Also, project meet and greets, relative specific to projects, and also individual meet and greets where we partner and try to make the connection with our certified small businesses to decision makers within the council to get that familiarity and establish those relationships. And so our folks here at the council can get an understanding of the capacity and capability of some of the DBEs that are in the market. Targeted outreach, I think you see those results back in 2021 when we did identify where we had some gaps. We targeted our outreach efforts to those areas and to those business owners who we were not reaching or were not connecting with, and that has shown in the results to where now we have spend and we have relationships with those business owners. Also, we had a new DBA orientation event, which was held on October 29th. I had the honor to provide the opening remarks and spend some time afterwards connecting with some of the newly certified businesses, providing them with as much advice, experience that I could provide, and with the hopes of them showing up and making a connection here with the council. We were joined by our partners from City of Minneapolis, Metropolitan Airports Commission, Minnesota Department of Transportation, and State Department of Administration. So we really try to be well-rounded and provide opportunities and how to connect and information relative to all of our agencies within the region, and give them as much information. It's good that they're certified, but now that you're certified, why is it important, and how can that certification be a benefit to you? And again, we were awarded some Thrive Equity funds, and we utilized those funds to contract with a vendor to provide supportive services, training to DBE and MCUB firms. And we have had some good success, good feedback from the firms. And we are continuing that here in Q4 and then also for 2025. And this is a listing of some of the classes that we administer through that contract, and also one-on-one business consultation services. We also have the Engage OEEO trainings, where these are internal to staff. We talk about the contract initiation process, our goal setting process. You know, many times folks might think we just throw stuff at the board to come up with these goals, but it is a very technical and in-depth process that we utilize to establish a goal. So we want to be transparent about that, and so that our folks understand not only how we do it, but the information, collaboration, and cooperation that we need from them in order to do a good job on behalf of the council. We have also contracted a third party to conduct a small business equity assessment. And we are looking forward to coming back probably in January to provide the results. We did receive a final report, and from the vendor. I think it was important that we did have a third party do this assessment as opposed to doing it ourselves. You may remember that this was a request that came from the Equity Advisory Committee for us to perform this work. And we are pleased that we were able to execute it and get the final results with some actionable recommendations. So we will be spending some time as well coordinating with our procurement department to come up with some of those actionable recommendations to bring forth to our council leadership for adoption and implementation together. And then also we have a proposed diverse spend plan policy. Again, a lot of the things that came out within that small business equity assessment, and when we have a chance to present, are directly relative to some of the initiatives and objectives that are outlined in that policy and procedure. So once that works its way through the process internally, we will be coming back for official approval and adoption by the council, by this committee and the full council. Thank you. With that, I will take any questions.
All right, thanks, Shanti. I think we might have time for just one question.
Chair and members, when we track the engagement with the businesses and we look at the dollar amounts, do we also include the number of employees that the that were created by the contracts that we make.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Pacheco, I think I understand the question. And if I could summarize, are we looking at the economic impact?
No, actually, I mean, we being the Latino Chamber has some contracts with DEED, and it's around workforce. And one of the things they do is if you have a contract, how many employees actually are generated by that contract? And if they weren't there, would the jobs be available if you? And that's one. The second one is that we have the majority of the business that we work with are mostly individuals versus a small business owner, or they're a lawyer or a doctor, whatever. There's a single individual. We try to. I guess the bottom line, we're trying to get an impact of what we're doing on the personnel front versus just the dollars that are raised.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember, that is not something that we track through any reporting process. We do receive some of that information, but the majority of it is through empirical or interaction with those businesses. As an example, we created and established a supplier diversity initiative with a couple of our small businesses, New Flyer, and also with Gillig. And when we go to these outreach events, those business owners who are participating, they really stop our staff and say, hey, and tell us things. I was able to create 3 new positions on this, or I'm now looking and we're expanding into other states because of this relationship that was fostered. So the majority is through those kinds of interactions, but we're not reporting that in any official capacity.
Just to follow up here, when we've been looking at what actually DEED has been offering is that if we help people get trained and certified, that if they hire so many people, there's a bonus, it's a $1,000 bonus, or there's something, and it's just so they can start generating more individual growth there. And I just didn't know if we do anything like that, or we're really focusing on the workforce, other than our own workforce needs, which we do a lot of. But.
Yes, thank you. No, we do not have any program like that as well in place.
Thanks, Ashanti.
I just have one
Okay,
comment,
go ahead.
just, and it can be talked about in January, but I noticed that the sole source contracts didn't have any DBE associated with them, and I understand if it's a licensing, but if it's or a piece of equipment, but if it's consulting and it's sole sourced, do we not have a DBE requirement on them, or can we put one in? And we could talk about this in January when you come back. I know we have another talk to get to and all of those things, but.
Yeah, I think that's a quick answer. No, we do not. If it's a sole source, we don't even, the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity does not see those contracts, and we don't evaluate them.
So my question would be, why not? So, yep. Good topic.
Real quick, Mr. Chair, committee members, perhaps that's a topic, as you mentioned, Councilmember Cedarberg, come back in January. We can talk a little bit more about what goes into the sole source process so that there's a better understanding of committee members.
Thank you. Unfortunately, Lila, we're gonna have to postpone your item to the next time because we have to get out of here for the May council meeting. So, thank you, Shanti. This meeting is adjourned.
Oh, I have to sit through us.
Thank you, Mr. Shelton.
We tried to speed things up, Lila.
Thank you.